Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 606. In fact, I've called it episode TR606 just because I've got a keyboard and I've realised that I could type that into my CMS and it would come up in the show title. But yeah, 606 is the episode, and you know, it's a portentous number in music technology. If we ever get to 808, that will be another one. We did 303, so you know, we're past that one. I don't know if we've done every single iteration of music technology, but I try and pop them in every once in a while, and that's because this is the podcast to do with music technology. It is actually a show dedicated to synthesizers, music production, electronic music production, all kinds of music production, recording, performance, live production, all of the things that go into making the things that we listen to in a musical form. So I want to say thank you to everybody for listening. If you've not seen us before, we record this every Wednesday at 4 p.m. UK time. You know, pretty much every week of the year, holidays allowing, and we also have a very good supporter in the form of iZotope, and iZotope will be giving away a copy of Ozone 9 a little later on in the show. Ozone 9 Advanced, you can find out how to enter that competition. You need to be on Twitter, and we'll also be announcing who won it last week as well. But anyway, let's get on to our guests. I'm going to start with Mr. Steve Hillier from Brighton, UK, who is an educator, a performer, a DJ, a pop icon, I dare say. And we haven't seen him for ages. And it's really good to have you, Steve. How are you, and how have you been? What have you been up to?
Well, I'm really pleased to be back, Nick, and thank you for such an amazing intro. Yeah, I've been all right. Actually, to be honest, about this time last year, I had a bit of some difficulty health-wise. Actually, I ended up being in hospital for a bit, but I'm completely over that. And since then, sort of travelling around, really getting in as much work as possible in Europe, and kind of excited with quite a few things that's been happening in the music technology world just recently, including a few acquisitions that we were just talking about, including the Neutron here that's above my System 100M, which is a beautiful thing, really. And I'm going to treat myself, I think, later today to some of those sort of templates. You know, you can put different covers over the top of the knobs that give the Neutron a different flavour, essentially, not sonically but just visually. And maybe I've got too much time on my hands, I don't know.
Nothing wrong with that. Too much time. Is there such a thing as too much time when you've got synthesizers to play with? Is that time well spent or time wasted? I don't think it's time wasted, but that's
well, I think it makes me happy, and that's all we could ever want, really, is it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. Well, lovely to have you, Steve, and thank you very much for joining us. And also, we have another regular, but not so much recently, Mr. Dave Spears of GeForce Software, he's in his sort of. I mean, I'd say this is the minor keyboard den, but you're still looking like you wouldn't be amiss with a cape on your shoulders, because you have, is that a CS60 on your left, a CS80 behind you, and a JD800 or 8000? I can't tell. 800.
60, 80. Well spotted.
So how have you been? What have you been up to?
All right. I bought this, though. Whoa, just for today.
Nice. 606. There it is.
It's not mine. It's a mate's. He's left it here for years. In fact, I think it's broken. I need to take it to Kent to get it fixed. But can anyone tell me, it's got separate outputs? They weren't standard, were they?
That's not. That's a retrofit. Yeah.
All right, in which case I might keep it. Thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Dave, of course, GeForce Software, synth historian, synth kind of aficionado, and GeForce Software's one of the GeForce Software main guys working on fabulous emulation software and such like. I've got a cold voice, so I can speak in kind of voiceover mode today.
It sounds very good.
Yeah, awesome.
Very
Perhaps.
radio.
Lovely to have you, though, Dave, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you say. And also, we have Mr. Gaz Williams here, who's once again with us from his studio. What is that mic? Is that one of the...
It's the Lewitt mic.
Oh, it's the Lewitt mic.
Yeah, it's the 640. This is the one that you can tap out the other diaphragm and do all the fancy changing the polar patterns after the fact, which is super cool.
Excellent.
But seeing that 606 though, I'm just pining. I've mentioned it before, but I sold my 606 for 40 quid, trying to raise some money to buy it. I can't remember what it was. It was some Yamaha RXy thing or something. But all my original 4-track recordings I did in the late 80s, it was all with my 606, and it's been one of my life's great regrets. Somewhere though, I still have the little silver bag with the orange writing on. So that's somewhere. I'm going to dig that out sometime. That's probably a collector's item, I would have thought. But yes.
I had a 606 myself that I bought really quite cheaply right at the end of the 80s. But when I sold it, I didn't sell it because I needed the money. I made that classic late 80s, early 90s thinking, I'll just sample this and I'll take one sample of each drum sound and that'll do. And, it's just one entry on my long list of regrets from the 80s.
Oh, that is a shame. I can understand that. I mean, I know that feeling because we all did the same thing, and everybody was kind of like, "Why doesn't that sound right? It doesn't sound the same. Why doesn't it sound the same?" And I guess we still don't know. Now sampling technology and audio interfaces have improved sufficiently to be able to kind of do these things more justice. But
I did that test where I ran my DRM1 and did just like a kind of kick snare, really simple pattern, and I sampled it, and then I copied and pasted that sample, and then just recorded it, playing it for a long time, and then just A/B'd between the two, and the non sort of looped version just sounded more engaging, and the
source material, you mean the actual instrument?
Yeah, I mean, I sampled just like a 1-bar loop and copy and pasted it, or I then just recorded the same, off. But when you look at the waveforms, and they all start exactly the same. They reach more or less exactly the same volume, but when you zoom in on the waveform,
it's all different.
It is different, every single one. I mean, it's obviously a very, very subtle thing, but I think that, we've talked about it before, haven't we? That idea that our brains just recognize a sample.
We're so used to a repeating pattern, whereas if it's constantly changing, it's the chaotic nature, of stuff. We just don't know what that is. For those who are interested, still goes for around 350 quid to 400 on Reverb, the 606.
Definitely keeping it.
So it's and also we think it was the 808 came first, and then the 606 came afterwards as a sort of cut down, as the flagship technology. But there was also the 303 that came along at the same time. But there was no equivalent sort of flagship technology for the 303 being brought into the 606 into that range. I remember as a kid, I went to London. I had some friends who lived in a squat. They were in a band called Eat, and I was kind of toying with the idea of moving to London and being in a band as the keyboard player, and I went up there, and there was a guy called Tim Saul, who's the bass player, brilliant bass player, and he was into techno at a really early age, and I went there, it must have been in the early 80s, and he had a 606 and a 303 in the little flip vinyl cases, and he would just do gigs with those two things, because it was all sort of really early acid, and it was around the time of that and go-go beat and stuff like that, and I just vividly remember seeing it and go, wow, that's amazing. That was my first exposure. So that, I don't know, it would have been in the early 80s. It might even be in the year of release. I can't remember, but anyway, that's my 606 story. That's all I've got.
The thing about the 606 was cool though, because you could program a whole song into it, and you could have all different sort of pattern lengths. It was surprisingly powerful, the way that you could make song arrangements. So I would make complete song arrangements on the for my 4-track. I would program it entirely on the 606, with all the different patterns and fills and all, full arrangements. So I think that's kind of like an underrated aspect of it. It's really cool.
Yeah, well, it was early. I mean, there were early drum machines to be able to do that. The pattern chaining and all of that kind of business. It was such a tedious and uninteresting way of creating music, wasn't it? I mean, because you'd end up, it would be like, oh, I really want to change the arrangement, but then you look at it and just go, I can't be bothered. I really can't be bothered to go through all of that again just to change, because I'd like to add another bar. So in many ways, it was the early tyrannical grid kind of scenario, I suppose, in many ways, even though it was analog. But I suppose that's really just nonetheless. So I mean, this program seems to have been sort of fallen into two camps. We've got the kind of like the retro remember this kind of scene, and then there's also some kind of quite interesting and terrifying future technology stuff as well. So let's start with I think we've got this guy. This is basically Fact Magazine did a little piece with Cerrone, or Cerrone, I don't know how you pronounce it, who, for those who don't remember, Supernature.
Salut,
which was
Marc Cerrone, je suis ravi de vous recevoir pour Fact Magazine. Voilà, où je suis, où je vis, je passe mes journées, et j'ai choisi aujourd'hui...
what's the point in play? I can't remember. I think I've got it here somewhere, actually. I can play the track that he's talking. This is the guy that made this track, basically, so you'll recognise it.
And they grew up in a way.
Very of its time. One of the early sort of synth disco tracks, I believe. Anyway, so that was all about how he did it, and it was fascinating. He was one of the first. He got sent a ARP Odyssey. Because there's so many truisms in this video. He sort of says, "Oh yeah, well as you would at the time, manufacturers would send you gear in the hope that you'd credit them on the album at some point. It was the same old, and it's a similar kind of protocol these days." And he said, and he realised that he could do this sequence stuff with the with the Arp Odyssey when it would just repeat, but he couldn't play it in time because he used live drums. So he slowed the tape down to half speed and played every single note in over. And the song was 10 or 11 minutes long, so it took him 20 minutes to do this kind of thing. And so that's that diddle thing, which is the sort of main thrust of the track. I just thought it was really interesting, and other facts as well that were fascinating about it. I don't know. Dave, you must remember that track. I mean, I'm not saying you were particularly you were probably only a kid when it came out, but it's probably I discovered it later, but it's very atmospheric, isn't it?
Such a good track. I remember it for very different reasons, which probably can't be broadcast. But do you remember the Kenny Everett show with Hot Gossip?
Oh yeah,
they would always dance to that particular track. So it was like double bonus for a young teenage lad, completely hormonally mental at the time. When weirdly enough, I was at school with a bloke whose sister was in Hot Gossip, who later married Pete Waterman, bizarrely enough. But
wow.
So yes, it was like, oh, come and watch Michael Gingell's sister on to dancing to Supernature in very scantily clad. There you go. That's a bit pervy, isn't it? But, I was young. I didn't know any better. I do now. But the French had it going on, didn't they? Certainly with the old disco clubby. Was Magic Fly? Was that Space or whatever? They were French, weren't they?
Yeah, I don't know.
That was also another kind of 70s killer thing. But I love this video. I could listen to people like that all day.
It's really interesting, and the video itself is actually very evocative of time. And in fact, Goldfrapp, I think their third album was called Supernature, and looking at the look and the vibe of that, she definitely, I guess, they have inspired with the creative sort of thing around that time and sort of utilised. They didn't actually cover Supernature, but they called their album the Supernature. Steve, you've DJ'd a lot. Is Supernature in your vinyl crate, as it were?
No, not really. I think it was a very big tune at the time, but I don't. You just don't really hear it out so much. I think these days it's kind of maybe associated with. I don't know. I want to watch what I'm saying here, but seeing as Dave's mentioned Kenny Everett, the board's wide open. But it feels much like a sort of gay disco tune.
Yeah, I think that's probably.
Ways.
I think it's probably Studio 54 really kind of got it going as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a niche and a very vibrant niche, but it's not a niche that I ever really played to. But watching that video, I realised a few different things, but just how much of an influence that chap's had on modern music, especially out of Northern Europe. And there was one particular guy who I really rate. He's called Lindström or Strom. My Norwegian pronunciation is rather limited, but he's really good. And a lot of the stuff that he does, you can hear there's a real he's taken a kind of a line from that late 70s electronic music where you had the electronics, but also a combination of live playing, which I think was, I don't want to call it unique to the time, but it was a real sonic fingerprint at the time. And his recent stuff sounds a lot like this, at least it's got the same DNA in it. So I'd really recommend, there's a tune of his called Blinded by the LEDs, which came out last year, which if you like Supernature, I think you'd probably like that as well.
Great. It's interesting, isn't it? That whole that sort of it sounds like it's phased or ensembled kind of thing. That was in loads of stuff, wasn't it? There was Japan, one of the early Japan tracks. You know, there's a ton of it. It was a thing, and listening to it, although he was going, I like to have it living. I mean, the beginning is massively out of time and wonky as hell. It's that just sounds like poor execution to me. But did you know, Gaz, that Lena Lovitch co-wrote that track?
That's amazing, isn't it? That's I mean, like, this song, I think, really, I gotta confess, came onto my radar in recent years because it was in the soundtrack on GTA 4, which, as everyone knows, the GTA soundtracks are amazing, but they're also, they're really well curated. They can, and there was one of the channels, I think it was like kind of studio. I think it was called Studio. No, I don't think it was called Studio 54, but it was something like that. And there's a lot of kind of disco and funky tunes on that. And that was on there. And because he's been making, Cerrone has been making really cool tunes, continues to make cool tunes in a similar vibe to this day, which is cool. But there is that kind of, I mean, it's amazing when you realize how kind of primitive the approach was. There still is a sophistication to the feel of the track, though, that I love.
Yeah, I wonder whether if you heard the multi-track before it was mixed, how rough it would be. You know, because it's one of those tracks that probably was done in the mix, which was much more the case those days. But yeah, I take your point.
But there was one thing that he mentioned in the video, talking about sophistication, which I thought was really interesting, where he was talking about having to play the bass line at halftime, and that taking a long time, so 20 minutes to do the whole thing. But then he also mentioned that compared to modern recordings, where we have essentially an infinite range of sounds at our fingertips, back then he was exceptionally limited. And what that meant was that he could turn around this entire record in about a day. I think he said he did it in just one day, from having the idea, or that's probably writing the song, to actually completing it, including mixing. And it just made me think once again that there's something really to be said for restricting your sound sources and just focusing in on the instruments you know really well. For lots of different reasons, but one of them is actually you can speed up your work rate, as Mark Cerrone experienced in this case.
Yeah, no, it's right.
And the vibe, that's what he was saying, wasn't it? It was just like, got into it. And all the great tracks that I know, particularly dance tracks, are done. I have to fit. I mean, Rick Smith talked about, rares and stuff with me years ago and stuff, and he was just like, I had to finish it. It was just like, I was in the moment, I was in the vibe, and it just had to be done. And I think that's the same with loads and loads of stuff. The performance is the thing. And even though you say it's a little bit wonky, and I dare say there was a bit of varispeed involved at some point, it's got a vibe. It's a sleazy vibe, but it's still a cool vibe.
I wonder, that's interesting. I mean, they call it being in the flow now, don't they? Which is the sort of, creative across all sorts of creative disciplines. And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? But it's harder. And that's, again, we've talked about that before, getting the IT out of the way so it doesn't inhibit the flow part of it. And we all spend inordinate amounts of time trying to make our own systems work so that it doesn't ever get in the way. And failing or succeeding to various degrees. Without that, where would we be? Where would this podcast be, though? That's all I have to say. We are the cornerstone of, So Anyway, that was the Cerrone and Supernature. It's on Fact Mag. I saw that on Synthtopia actually, which is worth checking out. If you, that's the original page. That's what the gentleman looks like there. I'm sure you know. So I don't know if that's an original ARP or whether he's now.
No, it's not. It's the wrong ARP.
It's the wrong
one.
It's the wrong ARP with the wrong. Okay, that must be. Is that the Behringer ARP or is that the Korg ARP? Oh, okay. Hard to know which is which these days. Although, yeah, that's got lights on it. Right. Well, that's 3 topics down. Crikey. So I hesitate. Maybe we should. Maybe I'll just drop the iZotope competition now, just so that we can get that out of the way. Because I have a feeling these next few topics will spur considerable amount of discussion. So let's just have a little chat with our friends.
Building on a 17-year legacy in audio mastering, Ozone 9 brings balance to your mix with never-before-seen processing for low end, real-time instrument separation, and lightning-fast workflows powered by machine learning. Expect lower CPU usage and shorter startup times with Ozone 9 compared to Ozone 8. Experience fluid metering in a fully resizable environment that lets you track the most subtle details of your audio. Use more plugins at once, mix while you master without worrying about slowdowns or dropouts. And immerse yourself in a smooth, modern experience designed to keep you in your creative flow. As you can see, Ozone 9 is the fastest way to get your master off the ground. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos and head to iZotope.com to learn more about mixing and mastering and to download your free trial of Ozone 9.
Why ever not? And we thank them for their sponsorship of the show in terms of bringing us the bringing us the prize. So this week we've got another iteration of the competition. So what we're looking for, if you want to win a copy of iZotope Ozone 9 Advanced, which is a fantastic mastering and just very useful piece of software, we're looking for the hashtag BringBalance, which is one word, and the hashtag Ozone 9 to @Sonicstate and @iZotope Inc. That's on Twitter. That's the hashtag BringBalance and the hashtag Ozone 9 to @Sonicstate and @iZotope Inc. And if you tweet those, you'll be picked from the supercomputer software winning algorithm that we've developed over many years. I'm not saying you'll be picked, but someone will be picked, as was from last week. And this is the algorithm in work. So a chap called Natal Hardy, I'm not sure where they're from. It looks like he might be playing, I can't tell if that's some sort of wind instrument. It may actually be some kind of ethnic Indian wind instrument. I can't tell, but his job is quality of life, and he tweeted the hashtags last week and was picked out of the participants. So in fact, it seems his entire Twitter handle is to do with entering the competition. So very much thank you for that, and which means you don't have to be on Twitter active just to win. But so if you want to get in touch, Natal, you are the winner. Right. Okay, so here comes. Have I got the right one? No, it's this one.
For instance, if someone wanted to clone my voice, there are hours and cloning. For instance, if someone wanted to clone my voice, there are hours and hours of my recording.
Let's try
Dear
that
fellow scholars, this is 2-Minute Papers with Károly Zsolnai Fehér. Today, we are going to listen to some amazing improvements in the area of AI-based voice cloning. For instance, if someone wanted to clone my voice, there are hours and hours of my recordings on YouTube and elsewhere. They could do it with previously existing techniques. But the question today is, if we had even more advanced methods to do this, how big of a sound sample would we really need for this? Do we need a few hours? A few minutes? The answer is no, not at all. Hold on to your papers because this new technique only requires 5 seconds. Let's listen to a couple examples.
The Norsemen considered the rainbow as a bridge over which the gods passed from Earth to their home in the sky.
Take a look at these pages for Crooked Creek Drive. There are several listings for gas station.
Right. Now, on the face of it, this might seem like a bit of an abstract topic, but and indeed it might be. John Pichet actually sent us this link and just sort of said, look what they could do with AI synthesized voices. And we quite often, we're exposed to this a lot. Some of us use Google Translate, some of us use Amazon services as well. I won't say her name just in case it fires off some sort of instruction in your home. But all of this stuff is current technology, and it's really quite interesting how that's come out. But what they've done here, and this is using a technique, it's called Google Tachytron, which is the kind of core technology. What they're able to do is kind of sample a voice, and then a neural network, and they call it in spectral, I think it's network vocoding or neural vocoding, that can then apply that voice to any written text and say it to speak it, and it's very convincing. But then another thing that they can do, which is even weirder, is they can take now, see if I've got this here. I don't think I've got the example right away, but basically what they could do is they can take your source voice and then get that to speak in a completely different language with varying degrees of accent as well. And that's just kind of mind-blowing. I mean, and what this might mean for music and other things is insane, you know, and I've not seen this kind of stuff before, and there are all sorts of ramifications for this, obviously. I know, Steve, we've talked, I'm sure, with episodes where you've been on with about the Votor and the technology that's quite prevalent in Japan, where you have these kind of synthesized voices singing tracks, and it's very useful for some people. Maybe you want to do demos and whatnot, but this is like another level. I mean, granted, it's not singing yet, but it can't be far off, right?
No, and this really caught my imagination when I saw the video. I think that there's so many possibilities here. We could take just a couple. First one, if you can construct a spoken voice and a convincing spoken voice from just 5 seconds worth of speech, could you use the same technique with just 5 seconds of an a cappella? So, for example, if you had a Whitney Houston a cappella and you wanted Whitney Houston to sing on your song, would it be possible to apply the same neural techniques to model a Whitney Houston for you and then get her singing for you? This is an extraordinary thing. But there was a few other things that made me wonder on this. I think around Christmas time, I know I wasn't on the show then, but there was some software. It was a new software vocalist. And it sounded very convincing. In fact, it sounded a lot like Sarah from my old band in Dubstar.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
and,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I tried, and some sort of cloud computing aspects of this, which was really good. I think that they actually synthesized the voice in their own server farm, and sent it back to you, and it was all good. But there was one thing that was still a bit of a pain, which is that you had to play in the notes, as like on a keyboard or something, and then type in the words in order for the vocal to be synthesized. Well, I was thinking, why don't you instead, couldn't we have a situation where a computer will be able to recognize the words that you're saying or speaking? So we've already got speech to text, and then combine that with some pitch detection, so that the way that you would input to these software vocalists is not typing things in, but singing into it.
Singing badly.
Yeah. Well, but much like auto-tune. Yeah. And it would speed things up a lot. But then I thought, well, then you could combine that with maybe the facility to model not just one vocalist, not just a Sarah Blackwood, but a Whitney Houston or a not Mark Ronson, but anybody who sings, which means not Mark Ronson. But, you know, you could just do that, and all of a sudden you could have essentially anybody singing on your record. And then came to the end, towards the end of my fever dream, which was, what about if you could also do this in real time? So, for example, rather than doing the voice to text recognition and pitch detection and then sending it off to render a voice offline, would it be that big a leap to actually do it in real time? So, for example, you could be on stage, and let's say that you've got a sore throat, or maybe you're just 20 years past your peak. You could have a model of your own voice
when you were good,
and then you sing. Yeah, that's right. And so you would sing, and then the voice would be would come out the speakers, hopefully essentially in real time. This would open up an incredible world of creativity for music. Then I had some paracetamol and felt a lot better.
Wow. Yes, I mean there's an element of subterfuge about this, though, isn't there? We're ignoring the kind of how will we ever believe anything we ever hear of a spoken word again or a sung word. Creatively, perhaps it doesn't matter quite so much because music is an art form, and it doesn't matter where necessarily whether the music was created from a sequencer, a machine, or a player. It depends on your personal taste. You might prefer the sound of a real player, or whatever. But in terms of actual information, it's terrifying. I don't know what you think about this, Gaz, but it's sort of. I mean, and I know you use voice control for a lot of stuff already, and it's already ingesting you, so it could probably spit you talking back at yourself one day, things that you'd never said. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, we saw that we covered that thing. Maybe it was a couple of years ago. I think it was Adobe was showing it, weren't they? Where you got like a word processor where you could actually just kind of write, and it would use the phonemes. Phonemes, is that what you call them? All the little parts, and then it will play it back and sound like whoever you want it to be. But I mean, Steve's just said something I was thinking about, which is just being able to sing like a kind of karaoke and have the person's kind of, it wraps your voice in almost like convolution in the person who you're singing, like singing like Elvis or something. You'd still have to put, I guess, a certain amount of the inflections in.
Yeah. This is what I meant, but this is it done properly. Yeah.
You're right. So it got me thinking about what the copyright, where the copyright will encompass the identity. I don't think anything like that exists, or I guess it's, I suppose it would come under forgery, would it maybe? But
yeah, we did discuss this, didn't we? That I think maybe last time Steve was on, the kind of idea that what happens, is that you or is that them? It's tricky, isn't it? But I don't know how. But I mean, as we said, also many well-known singers of the past, maybe not in the current era, but in the previous, were just singers. They didn't songwrite, so there's a less of an issue there. I suppose if you're talking about people who wrote the song as well, and you're singing, then you're sort of getting into. So what happens if you put Elvis on a current voice, or two people that are still alive, one who wrote the song and one who didn't sing on the original, mashed them together in a way that made it? Mess that up. I don't know. It's terrifying. I don't know, Dave. What do you think? It's an interesting. I mean, is this a window into what's going to happen? I mean, is there going to be a point whereby we don't, as human beings, we are unable, I mean, this is happening politically, I don't want to get into that too much, but we're unable to tell what the truth is already in most cases. So when it comes down to basic stuff, like somebody rings up, so it's applied to maybe sales or, facts or quotes or anything, could this, you could get anybody to say anything and it would sound convincing.
Yeah. Yeah, I admire Stephen Gaz's optimism. I do not share it in the slightest, I'm afraid. The only good thing I can think about this is those irritating accident cold calls and PPI things might sound slightly less irritating.
Oh, yeah.
But this is open to rampant abuse, and I don't see any good coming from it. Hey, I'd love to be proved wrong. But we have a hard enough job distinguishing what's fact and what's complete made-up nonsense as it is. And as for, artificial intelligence, can we see some actual intelligence before we kind of disappear down this rabbit hole? So, no, as far as I'm concerned. I do not want my dad, somebody pretending to be my dad, ringing me up, telling me my mother's died and then trying to scam me out of a load of money, because that's the dark side of where this is going to go, and that's where it'll go.
Yeah, I kind of suspect you might be right. I mean, it's going to increase. It's going to require a whole new set of legislation and whatnot. It's going to be quite fascinating, and I think, I wrote an article about this today as well, and where I was thinking, the rise of the robots is not being corralled into pens and forced to do hard labour by robots with laser guns. It's this. This is the reality of it. There's sort of the skew in what is real and what is true, and as a human,
this already. Sorry, Nick. Yeah. This already exists in journalism. I know. I went to see John Pilger talk ages ago, and he said that actually what's happening now are publishers are churning out artificial intelligence articles in the style of or in the prose of, and that's really quite frightening. I don't know. We're already scared enough. I don't need to be scared anymore.
Any more scared? I saw you wanted to come in there.
Just to build on what Dave said there, with the should we call it artificial journalism? This has been going on quite a while, and I know of many cases where basically the article that you read is a sort of an AI version of a press release that's come from a brand. So there's not even an attempt at the pretense of this being a disinterested party writing about something. It's just essentially rewriting the words that's been supplied by a big company. So
I think this might have been mentioned before. Actually, I'm kind of thinking, I could do with some of that sometimes, because it's not enough of us to go round to rewrite that press release that's just literally, VST plugin releases 200 new presets based on blah 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 blah. I mean, I would imagine that doesn't do much harm, but yeah, it's I can see where you're going with this.
Oh, you don't like those?
One thing I'd want to just add to this, and I do understand Dave's concern about all of this, but I think we've already lived through a period where we've adjusted how and who we trust, if you know what I mean. So we're really used to now things like banks don't ring you up and ask you for money, or that if you're going to log into Gmail, they'll occasionally send a text to your phone. So you get like an extra level of verification. And I'm hoping that we'll get this in a wider society, that we won't just take on board a voice that we've heard, like a video that we've seen, unless it's endorsed by an institution that we actually trust. And of course, though, that opens up a whole new world of problems, which is which institution do you trust? I suppose that's true. In the meantime, I like my synthesized voice thing.
I think that I will stick with that, shall we, Gaz? I think let's stick with the benign future, shall we?
I wonder though if there's going to be like kind of surgical implants where you can have digitally kind of controllable voice cords actually implanted into your throat. Obviously you'd probably need to somehow stretch your head as well.
I think there'll just be an app. You can just talk into your phone and out will come.
Yeah. But I mean, it is, we're going through this really strange time at the moment with copyright regarding, certainly recently with the Katy Perry Flame issue of that being like a likeness. So this is another headache certainly for for copyright going into the future. I think I think there is a really intriguing notion there of something that sounds just like something, whether that will become even more kind of legislated against, or in terms of copyright.
The complexity. The complexity. Yeah. Well, it sort of probably goes back to the kind of the rules of robotics with Isaac Asimov, isn't it? And or Arthur C. Clarke, isn't it? Was it Asimov or Clarke? I can't remember. Asimov. Yeah. I can't remember what they are, but they were sort of basically don't be evil, weren't they? Pretty much was the sort of the nub of it. Kind of like what Google say they're supposed to do, but I'm starting to have my doubts these days. I'm not so sure about that.
It was too hard.
Anyway, okay. Let's kind of move this more into the sphere of music technology. Although I think this is relevant because there's a crossover here between what we use in music technology and what is now happening in technology that forms to the wider people. Perhaps I won't go into the what's happening in China thing, because it just might be a little bit too depressing. But I haven't got a video for this. But okay, so let's with these technological advances in mind, future gear and future trends, where do you think we're heading now? Because we've had this massive analog kind of resurgence. There's this sort of moving window of nostalgia, which I was talking about in the Wave State review, which I'm currently working on, and the idea that we've had analog stuff on the focus of that open window that was being brought back. Behringer are doing it all the time. There are other people who are reinventing or reinvigorating or regurgitating, however you look at it. But then now Korg have got the Wave Station and with the Wave State, and Dave, you were saying something about people kind of looking for classic M1 sounds. Do you think it's shifting? Are we heading to a kind of digital nostalgia as well? And if that's the case, where do you think new stuff might be coming? I mean, new stuff, or what the trend, whatever that might be.
Oh, it's definitely, it moves. It's just a generational thing, isn't it? Actually, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said Elvis memorabilia is kind of the prices have kind of fallen off the cliff edge because that generation are starting to sort of disappear. So, it does shift. In fact, it's really fast. I did this album last year or whenever it was. It only took me like 10 years to do. But it was based about growing up in the 70s, and it did better than I thought, 7.5 copies, which was pretty good. So I decided to do an 80s. I've started on an 80s one, which of course means that I can go to Chris and go, can I have a Fairlight? Can I have one of these? Can I have one of those? Which Chris will just go, no. But as a result, we've got a Wave Station, which I started to kind of noodle with. Very interesting. And then I just fired up the M1, and there are just sounds on that immediately transport me back up the early 90s, really. But the nylon guitar, the piano for the kind of house vamp stuff. And I did get this kind of wave of nostalgia. Really interesting as well, because I pulled out a Nord lead, which of course Anders used on, back in the day. And there was just one patch in there that was like the beginning of one of their tracks. And I was like, wow. And I definitely got a little bit goosebumpy. So it's really fascinating. New generations kind of coming through. FM at the minute seems to be, I hesitate to say where the cool guys are at, because I don't class myself as cool. But I want to know more. We've got a coder who's 26 and has grown up with FM, and that's his real passion. And actually what he's done with that's just blown me away when he kind of plays me stuff that he's done, modules that he's built in software, obviously, and he's played that to me, and I'm like, wow, so how do you get that? So that's something I want to kind of go back to that era. Where we go next, obviously, I have no idea. I'm the last person to be commenting on that. But it's really fascinating. I do find this kind of, obviously, I'm a child of the late 60s, really 70s. So for me, things like this and the Moog and stuff were things that I could never afford at the time. And obviously, as I've got older and can sort of semi-justify it through work, that's where my kind of love has been. And now it's kind of strange, though, moving into the sort of digital realm. It doesn't do it for me, but I understand. For example, one of the tracks, because I did these kind of pastiche styles on my album, one of the things that I wanted to do was a kind of scritty track. And I know, they're amazing. Gamson's work was amazing, but I know that a load of that was DX and Fairlight, which again got me kind of, right, I'm gonna master this DX. And as a kind of sound designer, sound person, I should really master all of this. So for me, it's kind of where my focus is at the minute.
Interesting. Gaz, what do you think? I mean, we often have these kind of, I think, what's coming. I mean, when we had BT on last week, there was a lot of talk about wave shaping and wave morphing, and that being the current zeitgeist. But after that, I mean, where else? I mean, maybe wave sequencing, but there was only one of those, whereas there's been a few other instruments that do the wave shaping. So what do you think?
Well, we've talked a lot about granular, and like last week we were mentioning how, Borderlands has just had a really great update, and granular still seems to be something which has so much more to discover. I mean, I think typically it was quite power hungry, and now we've got oodles of power. I'm curious to see. I was going to say something though about the digital things. Wouldn't it be good though to have like a box with a big knob on it, and it's got loads of different digital to analog converters on, and you can just switch between digital to, in terms of
emulations, right? Yeah,
because the digital gear, it's all like ones and zeros, isn't it? Apart from the D2A becomes the kind of thing that really makes the characteristic sound of those particular devices. So if someone made, and I'm assuming that a lot of them were, I don't know what the D2As are, for instance, on a lot of these things. But if you just rounded them all up in a box, and then when you're playing a sound that's off a DX7, it comes out of that converter. When it comes out of a M1, it comes out of that. And it's and then surely if you had something like that, then all of those would sound exactly like the original thing, because the digital part of it is the same, isn't it? I mean, that bit's easy to, well, I say easy, but
yeah, I know. I see what you're saying. That sounds quite interesting, because we were talking also about there was the RMX 16, which was, they can't get the D2As and the A to Ds of the original kind of reverbs, so they've emulated it on better quality ones. So yeah, I mean, having a few classics, I mean, collections. I don't know if it could be done real time in, I suppose it could be, couldn't it? I mean, there's no reason why not. I mean, I guess it's viable.
But I mean, it's turning into analog, so it kind of just has.
I guess you need really, really good D2As or A to Ds so that they didn't add any colour first. But yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, it turns it into analog. This is an analog, to see what I mean.
The other way around, yeah. So it's the output, yeah. Okay, I see.
The output, and then you can plug that into whatever you want. But in terms of future, I mean, I was mentioning about granular. In Cubase, it's that really interesting. In the new version of Cubase, PadShop 2 has got the spectral oscillator, and that is really, really interesting. And I feel that is something that points the way to the future. I mean, that PadShop. And I know you love that name, don't you, Nick? PadShop. Was originally just like a very cool granular synth, and now with the advent of this spectral oscillator, it does this really interesting thing where it will automatically, whatever note that you're playing, it will kind of time stretch it, but it's more than that. It's sort of
we covered it, didn't we, in the Cubase review?
Yes, in the Cubase 10.5 review, we cover that. But I think that points the way. I think these things which are, which maybe were impossible in the past purely because of the amount of DSP needed. So I wonder what else, because like convolution used to be like really, really difficult for processors to kind of manage now. And maybe we don't. So so that's what I'm wondering. What does the additional computer power allow us to do that was maybe really, that we could maybe know how to do, but was hard, So that's what I'd be thinking about.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So, Steve, I mean, you just got the Neutron, which is about as non-future in many ways. The underlying technology of that is not particularly futuristic. It's just a sort of interesting take on it and a flavour of older stuff. I mean, where do you think the future lies in terms of either where you might gravitate or stuff that we're likely to see in terms of instrumentation and instruments?
In terms of what I'd like to see, I would really like to see a modern 5-octave, full-size keys FM synthesizer.
Right.
And I'd like it. I'm still using, I've got a DX7 behind me here, and actually this camera right here is sitting on top of my DX11, and these are lovely instruments, but they do feel like what they are, at least 30 years old. So I would really like to see a modern update on this kind of technology, and by the same token, what I'd also would like to see is a modeling synthesizer, but not an analog modeling synthesizer, but a physical modeling synthesizer in hardware. Because I don't know whether I've missed it, but I don't think there's been one since the Yamaha machines in the early 90s.
I think you're right. I mean, and we did a couple of pieces on those when we were in Hamamatsu, and they're just the CPU equivalent in I forgot the name of it now. It was like having a kind of 2 Mac Quadras in a keyboard, which at the time was insanely, it was just over specified. Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry,
my Alesis Fusion has got physical modeling.
Ah, okay.
So there, yes, the much maligned Fusion.
Well,
there was just one other thing. There was something else that I think points the way to the future, which is going to seem a bit odd. With all these reissues of the older analog classics that we're seeing from various people. It's kind of made me wonder at first, like, does this mean that we're coming to a bit of a cul-de-sac in terms of where we're going to go musically or where we're going to go sonically or whatever? But I had a couple of fascinating conversations with young people who I see occasionally. And I was at a party last year where there was an 18-year-old who was DJing, and he was playing a whole load of rock from the 80s.
Right.
People, things like Journey, Don't Stop Believing, and lots of Guns N' Roses and this kind of thing. Now, I said to him, I had to ask him, what is it that appeals to you about this music? Because it's really old. It wasn't particularly cool at the time. What is it that you like? And he said, it's real. And I said to him, well, but quite not Journey so much, but a lot of the rock that came out in the late 80s was considered artificial or overly produced or whatever at the time. But to your ears, it sounds real. Yeah, and as this conversation went on, we just realised that I had a totally different context for this music than he did, and he was coming to it with completely fresh ears and just loved it for what it was. And the reason I mention this at all is that there's a strong possibility that with all of these analog reissues that we're seeing, that the young people coming to them, they don't have the sense of heritage that we have, or at least if they do connect these analog machines to music from the 70s and 80s, they'll have a completely different sense of taste. And so they'll use them in a different way, in a way that we haven't heard before.
Yeah.
That absolutely happened to us with the Tron when we released the original M-Tron. For the first thing we did was for the first 6 months or so, maybe the first year, was we just got CDs in from people recreating a Yes song or a prog track. And because Chris and I had worked with the original people, we were like, it just sounds like a cover version of, I don't know, whatever the track was. And then all of a sudden, the youngsters got it, and they weren't aware of any of this stuff from the past. And then you started hearing it on trip hop. There was an amazing band called Harmonic 33. They were Bristol, West Country way, and they sent us this CD. And Chris and I just stood there and went, "Wow!" It was just brilliant, beautifully produced. In fact, one of those guys now produces Spyro Gyra, lives in Brazil, has a very nice life, thank you very much. And the other one, oh God, what's the other one? He's a well-known producer, remixer guy now, works with Clark and all sorts of people. And you knew that, they just approached it from this kind of completely fresh angle. For us, that was a moment. It was a real moment. So yeah, hopefully. And also to build on what Steve said is a nice DX, a nice FM synth, but please, can we have some knobs on it, please?
Well, I've got the. I mean, you may have seen when we were at NAMM. There's the Korg 6-op, which is a 6-operator FM synthesizer, quite large. I don't know if I've got the. Let me see if I can find a picture of it. It was in a glass case. There was no real kind of.
Yes. There was no real. Interesting.
Let me see if I can find it. Korg OP6, sorry, or Op 6. I beg your pardon. Not 6-op. Where is it? Let me just see if I can find this thing.
Yeah. I remember seeing that.
And there are some knobs on it, but not, and some sliders, and and so that to me looks like it might be exactly what you're looking for. Either of you or both of you. So, there it is. And Korg, it's really interesting the way that companies go in and out of sync with the zeitgeist. And it feels like Korg are really riding the wave just ahead of the curve, and they're starting to drive the zeitgeist rather than react to it. So this and the wave state is, it's a phenomenal piece of work. It's very complicated, but like I said, when we first put that video out of the ARP 2600 and the wave state, Ed went to Korg HQ before NAMM, and he kind of filmed both of them, and we released them, within a couple of days of each other, according to the embargoes. The wave state video is probably a third more popular than the 2600 video.
Interesting.
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, that's not a qualitative research, but as an indicator, it's quite an interesting sort of metric to kind of think about. So therefore, maybe it's not. What is the driving interest into those, and maybe and hopefully, in fact, it's not us lot. It's, you know, a younger generation who have a real interest in these things because they've seen them. You know, maybe they've got mates who've got hold of one because they would have been cheaper for a while. So, you know, they're more likely to be in the hands of non-collectors. Occasionally, you know, people who just sort of, I found this and I thought I'd give it a try. You know, so therefore the technology sort of bubbles back up again and the quality is then sort of rediscovered. And I think that's maybe what's happening.
It's exactly what happened with 808s and 909s, you know, when they were being sold for nothing, 303s and stuff. Whole new generation bought them, churned out a load of new kind of refreshing music. Really fascinating. But I'll leave you with one very interesting story, an amusing story about wave stations. Chris here, do you remember the Wave Station SR, which was the kind of little 1U rack with the teeny display? It was kind of a bit of a preset machine, but obviously you could delve in there. It was the wallpapering through a letterbox analogy taken to the extreme. Chris here was asked to do some sounds for Korg and had worked his way through numerous sounds. And Chris is really kind of punctilious about detail and very good at it. And he'd left it on the whole time and he hadn't backed it up, and he came down one morning and the display was showing garbage and he'd lost all his work. And he said to me, "That's the nearest I came to suicide."
Wow, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of work, I can imagine. I mean, the thing about the Wave Station here is you could do a lot of tweaks, and there's the way that they use the program buttons along the bottom as, you know, program buttons, but also as wave, and you have to flip modes. And if you forget to flip modes and you hit a button and go, I want to edit that step, it's like, oh, I've actually just recalled another preset, so it's all gone. But to be fair, it stays in one mode or the other, so you learn pretty quickly not to not to do that. But
don't do that. Scary.
Yeah, it can be. It can be indeed. Well, fascinating. I just thought it's worth... I mean, there are other topics, perhaps. It feels like we've reached a natural conclusion here. I mean, we'll save a couple because inevitably, after you get like the big trade show NAMM as over, there's a sort of dip in new releases, although they're still coming out. It's just that I thought I'd throw in some of these more philosophical discussions. Gaz, you look like you're pining to say something there, so I'm gonna drop you in it. Was that right? Oh no, maybe not.
No,
I do beg your pardon.
I was pining for a cup of tea, I think.
Well, I've got one here, but it's cold and you can't. You're not going to be able to enjoy that at all. It's an interesting time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
can I say something, Nick?
Yes, of course.
I mean, obviously, Superbooth will be with us in April. And we've seen, you know, for the last few years, certainly, that perhaps things that we would have maybe had debuted at NAMM maybe been held over till Superbooth.
Yeah. Well, the Korg Op 6, for sure.
Oh, that's going to actually be...
Yeah, they said it's going to be shown at Superbooth.
Oh, okay. So I just wondered about that then. I just wondered if, just purely speculatively, if we could sort of think about what could be coming then, just to I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think one thing that is going to be very interesting, and this kind of brings Behringer into the equation, which we sort of tend to studiously ignore because they get so much publicity already, it sort of feels like a little unfair to give them more. But what's really interesting about the new Arp 2600, which is a thing of beauty, massive, large-scale thing with this keyboard and the case, and the fact that it's only a limited run and it's already sold out. And then obviously Behringer have been pushing their version of the 2600 with the AM Synths guy. I forgot what his name is. And they've obviously been working a lot on the engineering side of it, but it's got a digital reverb. But the thing that's fascinating, they're constantly saying it's coming. But we also heard rumours. I mean, there have been rumours. I don't know if there's any truth in this, that there was going to be an Arp 2600 Mini from Korg as well that was more affordable and they could do a bigger production run. I just wondered about, you know, they're both obviously trying to hit the Superbooth thing. How awkward would it be if they ended up with booths next to each other as well at Superbooth? That would just be, I think that would be, that's something I'd look, if I could see that raises a chuckle there, because I do recall there was some beef between someone at Korg and someone coming up to the Behringer stand and having a bit of a go. So it'll be very interesting to see if that happens and whether or not it is the case, because that I don't know. Looking at the Behringer 2600 and you look at the Poly D which came out, was actually quite, you know, for Behringer stuff was quite expensive.
So whether the 2600 will have to be similarly expensive because there's just a lot of electronics in it, and how close those two things, if the Korg thing is real, would end up being in terms of price, would be kind of an interesting.
Do we know for sure that there's a Mini?
No, we don't. I mean, we absolutely don't. I mean, there were questions asked at NAMM, and there was no absolute denial of that. So I don't know whether that means anything or not. I mean, I don't think anybody. I would testify in court to say that there's proof, and I can't.
So tight with their NDAs, man. So tight. I helped Mark Doty a little bit with the video he did for the 2600 for Reverb, which was great. I mean, there was stuff on that I didn't even know about the 2600, and I know Pete Townsend, and he'd never told me how he'd used it. But Mark obviously couldn't tell me what it was for. He was just picking my brains about a specific area. And so obviously when it was announced, the first thing I did was like, well, I want one of those, because the Mini Moog reissue's brilliant. In fact, I use that here all the time because it's got MIDI and aftertouch and stuff. And so for me, even though we got an old 2600, I'm like, I want one of these, but I couldn't get one. Just couldn't get one quick enough. And then the phone started ringing off the wall. Can you get me one? Can you get me one? So it was fever pitch, man. Fever pitch. I know of 2 people in the UK who managed to snag one. One of them is on this podcast sometimes.
Yeah, no, he said. I mean, Ty sort of let the cat out of the bag when we were under NDA. You know, he said, "Yeah, I've got one, or I've got one on order," and it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know how many they made, but it certainly wasn't enough demand. So you just think, why would you create that amount of demand around something and then not be able to fill the void that was left by them not being able to supply it to everybody? So that's the thing I find interesting. I don't know. Do you have any theories on this, Steve?
No, I don't actually. Except that it's a good question, and in theory, I'll come up with something. But no, I think you're right though. It does seem a bit strange to put so much effort into recreating such an incredible instrument, but only to sell it as a limited release. And Korg have been around for so long, I don't believe that this is an accident. There's bound to be a reason for this, and I don't know what that is, sadly.
No, well, we can only speculate, and that's the nature of press and news. Yes, of course you can.
Is the Behringer 2600 rack mountable? Is it 19-inch rack? Or
I think it might be, but it looked like it was, but I couldn't say for sure. I mean, there was another video that came out this week, which was a kind of overview and demo of a bunch of the features. You know, I don't know what a 2600 sounds like, so I couldn't say whether it sounds, bang on or whatever. I just have no opinion on that. But I suspect it sounds, it's going to sound okay, but I don't know whether it's rack mount. I couldn't tell you that.
Anyway. I mean, that is a thing. Well, I was going to say the original 2600, as beautiful and wonderful as it is. I mean, it is a big old thing, isn't it? So I mean, it does make sense having a more compact one for a lot of people, just purely because it's very impractical. The original, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, well, it can be certainly. No, good point. Well, it feels like that's probably a good time to end before any of us says anything libelous. I'm talking of myself, of course.
Shall we do that? Shall we give it a go?
No, let's not.
Yeah, and claim it was just an artificial intelligence voice doing it.
Well, if I make the screen go black, then it might be possible. But it'd be like Gus Honeybun. Turn the lights off, Gus. Yeah. Oh no, that's not it. Well, that's the wave state. There it is. It's just sat there. In fact, yeah. Okay, but anyway, thank you, everybody. That was a very interesting discussion and filled the sort of lack of news void very amicably, as far as I'm concerned. So that's it again for this week. I want to say thank you very much to our guests. I also want to say thank you to iZotope for providing the prize. Don't forget, if you want to win a copy of Ozone 9 Advanced, we're looking for the hashtag Bring Balance was one word and the hashtag Ozone 9 as one word to @Sonicstate and iZotope Inc. But that's it for this week. So, Dave, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you, and good to see you in your habitat there. I hope, I'm sure you probably got some stuff coming out soon, but I'm not even going to bother asking you because I know you can't You won't. You just refuse to talk about it.
I can't. No, I can't.
Exactly. I understand.
They've got a thing where they're allowed to beat. If I spill any beans, they can beat me round the head until I'm unconscious with a big old school telephone directory, which they keep handy. So I try and avoid that. The only thing I will say is I've been working on a video. So I haven't done a video for a long time. We did old instrument videos, and that's why the CS is in the background, because I finally relented. They're all doing GUI stuff and Cody stuff, and there was this kind of little week of opportunity. So I'm doing a video. Well, in fact, I've just finished the video on the CS80, and I'm just waiting for a couple of little sound bites from some people, hopefully, that will make everyone laugh. But that's why that's there, and that's there.
Excellent.
It's been good. It's been really good fun.
We'll look forward to that. Is it possible to play the CS80 and not sound Greek?
Well, that's the premise. So whilst I do a walkthrough of the whole CS80, because there's so many little hidden things that I think are the work of genius, particularly for its time. Whilst the synth engine is fairly bland, it's the way everything comes together. I know I've shown you before, but I mean, that's a key. That's insane.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a key. So there's your, and if I, hang on, maybe I won't do this, but maybe I will. If you want to see inside, I mean, no, I can't do it.
No, I know what it looks like.
To the thing.
I know what it looks like there. Yeah, it's...
The worrying thing for me when we were going to buy one, or when we were really thinking of buying one, was, I don't want to spend all that money and sound like Vangelis, just sound like Vangelis. So Kent and I were building this kind of list of albums and iconic things that it was played on that weren't necessarily Vangelis. But when you get it and you start to use those presets, which were predominantly used by Vangelis, you can't help it. So there's moments in the video
or
where
Paul McCartney.
It's like, sounds like Vangelis, sounds like Vangelis, sounds like Vangelis, mate. So yeah, and I'm hoping to get a couple of really, really good voiceover people to do a couple of sounds like Vangelis, mate, bits of humour. So yes, there you go.
That sounds fun.
When you close, when you sign off, I'll just open it so everyone can see what a fucking mess it is inside.
Oh, thank you very much, Dave. And also, Steve Hillier, lovely to have you aboard. Nice to see you back on track and back in the world and doing what you do. What are you jetting off to next then? Have you got some big stuff planned?
I've got a whole load of DJing things that are coming up. It's funny, normally sort of DJ stuff happens in the late spring and summertime, but this year the season for me started really early. So I was actually over in Bath this weekend.
Oh, were you?
I did a thing called the multi-host ball. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No, I don't know.
But essentially, it's like an enormous party where one of the hotels is taken over, and I've been doing it for a few years. It's been great fun. I ended up on Saturday doing 7 hours without a break, finishing at 6 a.m. So it was that kind of do,
Wow.
Yeah, so the year's off to a flying start, but I'm hoping to have some new music out on the world very soon as well, which is about time, quite frankly. So hopefully, if anybody's interested, I'll keep them up to speed when that happens.
Yeah, that's nice.
I'm noticing it looks like my house is on fire. What's going on there?
It's not. It's just the light. Well, at least I think so.
Okay.
There's nothing behind you, a fire. So yeah, it's
I
honestly
can't smell anything.
No, well. But thank you very much, Steve. It's a pleasure having you. And also Mr. Gaz Williams there in Bristol. Thanks for joining us too. And yes,
my pleasure.
We'll see you all again soon. And yes, of course, Superbooth will be coming up. Well, it's not until April, so I suppose it's going to be a little while yet. But
Synthplex is before that, isn't it? I wonder if that will see some. I wonder if that will actually see some exclusives, because that would be nice for Synthplex. Because is it second year for Synthplex? Is it?
It is. Yeah, Jim, one of the guys who you may have seen, he's been here. He's also is part of the NAM team. He's going to be going, I believe. So we should have some video stuff from there. So yeah, hopefully it'll all be sorted. Yeah, Synthplex, of course. I think it's in March, isn't it? I should probably
last week of March, maybe. Or
last week of March. Yeah, we'll get the dates up and start telling people about it anyway. But that's it for this week. Thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure as ever. We will wave you off with our usual end. Oh God, Dave, you've got. Hold on, you've got the. There it is. Look at that. Ta-da! Wow. Crikey. I mean, you look inside one of those. Does it have a special smell as well? I expect it probably does, but Dave can't hear. Yes, it does. That CS80 smell. Right, folks. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you all next time. That was Sonic Talk number 606. See you later. Bye-bye now.